cabinet. On, ah, good job remembering. On top of my desk, I also had a typewriter. Okay, that was, we're talking 1985. Okay, no computers, no cell phones. Most of you don't even remember those days, but that's what I had. I had a telephone on the desk. I had a typewriter, and I had a mailbox. And very importantly, I was checking that mailbox a lot. Like, I didn't know what I was supposed to do, but in that mailbox came one of these things from the universe, came a flyer that said, at the University of Oregon, which was my alma mater, and about, as it turned out, about 5 blocks from my house was the University of Oregon. I got this flyer that at the University of Oregon, this new young professor, it didn't say that in the flyer, but I found out he was new and young, was had a grant to run a postgraduate program, so for master's level program, to help educators support the work of other educators to improve student outcomes. Something like that. I wished I saved that flyer, because that flyer is what really changed my life. So the person who had this position, this new grant, was Jerry Tyndall. I called him up. I made an appointment. He and I talked and really hit it off. He had just gotten his PhD from the University of Minnesota. And he thought I was a good candidate for his program. And I signed up, not to get a second master's degree, but just to get training, and took courses from him. And then, and it was interesting. His approach, what he focused on, and has been always a centerpiece of my work, was data-driven decision-making. That was very much his training from the University of Oregon, University of Minnesota. He had been part of that group that invented essentially curriculum-based measurement. So he worked with Stan Dino and Jim Eiseldike, and his cohort in the doctoral program were names I'm sure most of you would recognize: Lynn Fuchs and Doug Fuchs and Jerry, Mark Shin, and an amazing group of doctoral students who worked over several years to invent curriculum-based measurement. So that's what his dissertation was about. That's what he was all about. And that's what he thought the answer was. If you are going to help your colleagues in schools help students get better, you need to do this with data. You need to collect data. You need to use the data. And I thought, okay, okay, I'll try that, because I don't know what else to do. So that's really where I started. And then by then I took a year's worth of courses from him. And then he said he really had other things to do. He didn't want to run that grant program anymore. And so would I start teaching the new group of, I think we were calling them consultants, consultant trainees, like I was a year ago. And now I started training these people and trying to stay ahead of the game. I really embraced the idea that the work we would do better for students if we used data. I liked that part of it, but there was so much more. And there were people writing about coaching, mostly consultation at that point. There were a couple of folks, if you've done any dive into coaching research, you would know the names of Bruce Joyce and Bev Showers. They had been at the University of Oregon, and they kind of invented what we would call peer coaching. And they were starting to do some research on peer coaching. And I was reading that, and I was reading the work of others in school psychology and special education about the collaborative process. Jerry didn't focus on that at all, but how do you work with another adult colleague? Of course, you're going to be collecting data, and you're going to be doing that, but how does that work go? And from the beginning, Jerry, being who he was too, said, let's study this process. Let's study what you're doing. Let's write down, let's develop a design. Let's do some studies, and then you can present them at conferences, and we can write articles and that kind of thing. So I did that. And then a year later, he said, you know what, you're doing all this work. You should just come into a doctoral program full time. So I did. So I was reading never left. I was also, along with running that coaching program and working out in the field and supervising coaches and still wearing the coaching hat, because I was part-time doc student and part-time coach. I'll just call it coach now. Reading never went away. And of course, if you're familiar with curriculum-based measurement, you know, one of the measures is oral reading fluency. And way back then in 1985, where everybody was just learning about this, there were no norms. So that's what I suggested to Jerry, that we need norms. He's, you know, this idea that we could measure students' words correct per minute was great, but what if, you know, what does 73 words correct per minute mean? What does 147 words correct mean? We had no framework for that. And he said, oh, that's a good idea. Do a study on that. So I did that, and I was always interested. So I was always writing about reading and doing research in reading. But for many, many years, including my dissertation and my work as a professor, both at the University of Oregon and Texas A&M University, was coaching and consultation, and continuing to study it, collaborate with others, create a model of coaching based on other people's research, also our findings from the field. So since that moment of really meeting Jerry Tyndall, I've had two kind of parallel interests.
Dan, just 1 minute. You're muted somehow here.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah. So the work with Jerry continued, and we did some writing and we did some studies. And then I took a job, a tenure track job in educational psychology at Texas A&M University, part-time in at-risk special ed and part-time in school psych. And in both of those areas, continued my research around the development of a consultation or coaching model, and just learned a lot. At Texas A&M, I met one of my students was Carolyn Denton, and we wrote a book, the first book on our model, which was called The Reading Coach, a how-to manual for success. And that was around for a very long time. And then the publisher stopped publishing it. But I wanted to keep the model alive and do something, have another book. So Carolyn at that point actually was retired. And so I found a new co-author to do the work, and Daryl Mickle, and he collaborated with me to write the newest version of the book based on the original work, based on everything I've learned since 1985. And our model now, Carolyn and I, back in, I think we first called it student-focused coaching in 1992. I had to go back and document that because some of you well know that there is a very popular model now called student-centered coaching. But that is not our model, and it is slightly different from our model, but I don't know if they borrowed our name and tweaked it or whatever they did, but student-focused coaching has been around for a long time with the idea, let's see if I can come up with the definition. I could read it out of the book, but the idea, our idea of coaching over all these decades and looking at all the research and our lots of field-based experience says that coaching is a relationship between, it's a relationship. I should read it. See if I can come up with this. With the parties mutually engaged in processes that focus on the outcomes of students. It's something like that. So We don't see this as top-down coaching, although our original title of the model actually was responsive consultation and then responsive coaching, with the idea that if you're working with a colleague who needs or wants you to be very directive and top-down, you can do that. That's perfectly fine. You can respond to their needs. If this person just wants to bat some ideas off of you, that's something that you can do. So we want it to be responsive to the need, but always focused on the outcomes of students. So Rebecca and I talked the other day about this, and I really thought about, there's really, as a student-focused coach, if you were to take on that, really embrace the model and do coaching under our model, there's two things you're always thinking about. One, first, always, is student outcomes. This is about students. That's why we have coaches. That's why we hire coaches. Coaching goes off the track when we lose sight of students. However, at the exact same time, this is the duality of our role. Our job is to provide professional development. Our job is to support teachers, all teachers, every teacher, to the best that we can. And it will never be perfect, and there's never enough of us or never enough time, but our job is to help every teacher become the best teacher they can be. So if you do have the opportunity, the honor to have the opportunity to coach a veteran, highly experienced, superb, gifted teacher, which I have, and learned so much through that process, there are things that gifted, extremely skillful teacher can benefit from you being their coach. And then all the way from the teachers who are just getting started and need all kinds of support, and the full range of eagerness too. We in our book, we talk about coaches or teachers that come to us at very different levels of readiness. And I know Rebecca wanted me to talk today about reluctant teachers, what we've learned about reluctant teachers. And I'm happy to do that, but maybe I feel like I'm just doing a webinar here, not doing a chat. So if there's any, I mean, there's nothing real meaty that I've said so far, but if there's any questions or comments or anything that.
Yeah, I was hoping we could open for questions, and as people are thinking, you can put it in the chat or feel free to open mic, or even just at the way my gallery is, I don't think we'll see hands up, but feel free to open mic or throw in the chat, and Jeannie and I can read. But I do think it's interesting too, that one question that came up over and over again. So let's be really clarify, is that this idea of the cycle, right? That there's this.
Yeah.
The coaching cycle, it's
Yes.
pretty much the number one question that we got. So if you want to address that, and then we'll let while she's talking, please they'll chat, and then we'll read those questions to her.
Very good. So Laura is asking if I've worked with Jim Knight, and I have. I hold Jim in very high regard, and I believe he holds me in high regard. In fact, we asked Jim to write the foreword for our book, and he very generously did that. So we are friends and colleagues, and we have different approaches to coaching. I would just say that. Jim embraced, and I cannot say that I am an expert in his model. I have several of his books. I've read them. There's very little of that I've ever heard Jim say or write about that I don't agree with, except that he based his model on cycles. And we did not, for I would say two reasons. As we were developing the model back in the 80s, and Jim started developing his model in the 1990s. So we had some work ahead of what he was doing, but we didn't go with cycles. In fact, I never even considered cycles as the framework for coaching, because I was aware of the research of Joyce and Showers, the kind of inventors of peer coaching. And they really conceptualized coaching as this mutual professional development between two teachers. So they didn't really see these people having a different role. They were two teachers and they would take turns watching each other and giving each other feedback. It was the origin of their research. And what they found, and published it quite early in their decades of work, was that having two teachers watch each other and give each other feedback didn't work. If work means kids get better and the teachers benefit from this process, what they found was, and I've quoted this so many times I can probably get pretty close to verbatim. They said having two professionals of essentially equal standing attempting to give each other feedback diminishes the collaborative process. I don't think diminish was the word, but it inhibits, it interferes with, it doesn't facilitate the collaborative process, which is exactly what you want to have happen out of coaching. They went on to explain that, but as a teacher, I got it right away. I don't really love it when somebody comes into my classroom with a clipboard and maybe a stopwatch and watches me teach and then tells me what I did wrong. Yeah, it doesn't make me, well, oh yeah, that was great. Come in tomorrow and do it again. So we saw that they were saying, don't do that. But they didn't say coaching doesn't work. What they said was, what does work in their research, they're not sitting around thinking about this, they're doing research. What does work is if these two peers sit down and collaboratively plan together. Think about what kids' needs are or classroom needs are or whatever the needs are. Collaboratively plan, help each other successfully implement that plan. That's what works. That makes sense to me. So then I also was aware because right before, in fact, Mr. Walsh, my boss, asked me to take on this role, I had been thinking, I've been doing this for 15 years at this point, what's next for me? And I thought maybe I would be an elementary school principal. So I went through the training to be an elementary school principal. So I was aware from that training that in the field of supervision, where a boss or a superior watches somebody, in this case, a teacher, when a principal watches a teacher teach, in the supervision research, everybody suggests you do a cycle, a supervision cycle. You meet with the person. So if I'm the principal, I meet with the teacher first. We talk about what it is I want to see or what I'm going to see. Then I observe, and then I meet and give this teacher some feedback. And there's all kinds of research about, how to give feedback and, all that kind of stuff. But it's a supervision framework. It always was. It was invented by the people who supervise. And that to me is the essential flaw of using cycles as the framework for coaching. Now, having said that, I would say we will use cycles. We don't call it cycle. We don't even use that term because that term comes from supervision. And because essentially Joyce and Showers said it doesn't work. So we don't use the term cycles, but within the student-focused coaching model, if the teacher we're working with wants us to observe them, we are more than happy to do that. We will do that. We'll give you feedback. And that's perfect. That's one of the tools in my coaching toolkit, but it's not the first one. It's one that's there. I always offer it to teachers. And sometimes there are teachers, that's exactly what they want you to do. And that's great. I'm happy to do that. But yeah, that's not where we start. And depending on how much time we want to go into this, we actually, so back up a little bit, we have in the student-focused coaching model, we train our coaches to take on 3 different roles. The first one, we always talk about it first, is the role of facilitator. Those tasks that a coach does legitimately to facilitate the good work that teachers are already doing. It's really important that we start with that headset first, and this notion, and disabuse ourselves of the notion that coach's job is to go around and fix teachers. Coach's job is to find the weakest teachers and fix them. If that's your model, you are going to fail, and you are on the track. You are being asked to do a supervisory job and all that. So that's not your job. It's never a part of the job. There's no research on having a peer colleague fix a teacher. We can talk more about that, but facilitator is our first role. It's also, we embed in that role the activities that you do that are not really coaching, but help you form relationships with people so that you can coach them. You know, just visiting their classroom and checking in. And we have some real specific things that in the facilitator role. The second role, and this is where we want our coaches, our most successful coaches, spend most of their time in this role, which is the collaborative problem solver. Based on Joyce and Shower's work and my now decades of coaching, I know this is what works. You find out from a teacher what their concern is, whatever it is. We start with that. We don't try to change their mind. We just say, okay, this is the concern that you have. And then using our skills as a collaborative problem solver, as a coach, we work with that teacher who's already bonded with us, because it's always voluntary, but they said they've got a problem. They've got a concern about a kid. They've got a concern about the curriculum. They've got a concern about the schedule. They've got a concern about this kid won't come in from the playground on time, whatever it is, their problem. I use that as the vehicle to do my job, which is professional development, but we focus it on kids, student-focused coaching. And there's tons I can say about that. But the third role, am I going in the right direction? Third role is the role we call teacher learner. And that is the more traditional professional development role. If a teacher wants me to observe them and give them feedback, I would be using my teacher learner hat. If I want to run a book study or attend a conference and then come back and share what I've learned at the conference, or have the third grade teachers are all wanting to know more about, comprehension strategies or something, do those kinds of things. That would be my teacher learner role. And we call it teacher learner because we do not want, I have my props right here, no coaches, the coaching role. And I know some of you are about to become coaches, and there's no coaching roles that when you become a coach, you get a tiara and a magic wand to go around and solve people's problems. And becoming a coach, one day you're a teacher and suddenly you're a coach. There's no power. We talk about this in the book too. There's no power and no authority. You have no, as a coach, you have no power and you have no authority. And that's really concerning to some people. For me, I find it much of a relief. Like I'm just a teacher colleague with a new role now. Instead of teaching kids, I'm providing professional development support to my colleagues. But you can get a tiara and a magic wand should you want one. I got mine at Target. So yes, you're free to do that. But we don't want you to think that you have a tiara and magic wand. We don't want you to act like it. So in the teacher role of coaching, which you need to do, and you need to be brave about it, because it's important that you do it. You're a teacher and a learner at the same time. And that's why we labeled it that way, as you can't, well, let me just say, I am going to pause here again in a second, but one of the things that's kept me involved in coaching in over 30 years now is how much I learn. How much I learn working with teachers. I've learned about, honestly, things I would not want to do, and things how not to run a classroom and how not to respond to students. But I've also learned things I never would have probably ever learned on my own by being in classrooms and watching these amazingly skillful teachers teach. So we do those 3 roles rather than cycles. And it's in the teacher learner role that if a teacher asks me flat out, can you do a cycle with me? I might have to go back and read my Jim Knight book to remind, but I would say, if you mean, can I observe you and give you some feedback? I absolutely can. And let's talk about what it is specifically you want me to look at, and what's the context for this. And then when I watch you, we'll sit down. So that's my response to the cycle question.
Thank you.
Kina, would you like to ask Jen your question?
Sure. Hi, good evening. I just wanted to know how this approach is connected to cognitive coaching.
Okay, another model of coaching, and we do, again, so that is originally, I don't know how long it's been around for a while. Costa and Garmston invented the model and trademarked it. Actually, cognitive coaching was, at least at one time, trademarked. And I'm familiar with it. I have seen some of the training. I am not an expert in cognitive coaching, but the model, as I understand it, is the role of the coach is to help shape and guide the thinking of a teacher. At its very, very essence. There's books and webinars and 8 days of training and things like that you can do for cognitive coaching. But the basic idea is the role of the coach would be to help figure out how a teacher is thinking and guide their thinking. And I certainly, again, there are certain things, we don't do deep training in that. If somebody wanted deep training in that, I would pursue Costa and Garmston's training. However, the model on its face, as I saw it, and it was described to me in the little bit of readings I've done, is that it's, I'll just say, we're having a chat here, I can be very forthright. It's ridiculously time consuming. The amount of time that I saw was implied in really being a cognitive coach. I can't imagine working with a caseload of teachers, nor can I imagine very many teachers being willing to spend that much time with me talking about what they're doing. So I may be very wrong. It may be a model that's very different than my understanding of it, but remember, I was trained originally by Jerry Tyndall, who said, get the data, look at what the students are doing. And then, yeah, I'll think about it and I'll talk out loud so the teacher can see what I'm thinking about. But we drive our work always focused on students, not just what the teacher's thinking, but are the students succeeding or not succeeding? And how can we focus on that?
All right, next up,
I just wanted to, sorry. I just wanted to say thank you so much. I was literally thinking about how to help the teacher kind of be reflective of what they're seeing that the students are doing. So the cognition part about reflecting on, did that specific strategy work, or other strategies would you, and just marrying the two in that way, not saying, that's what I was talking about, the connection, but thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. So thank you for clarifying that. In my work with teachers and thinking about these different teachers that I've worked with over the years, I would, clarifying their thinking around a student would happen organically through our process of the collaborative problem solving role. We start always, it's essentially a 4-phase process where we start with the teacher's concern. Then, and I talk to the teacher and get a sense of what their beliefs are and their philosophies and why it's a concern. And then in between step 1 and step 2, I actually almost always try to collect some data. I come into the classroom and watch the student of concern or whatever it is. Then we come back and look at the data together. And that's where the process really starts, me getting inside the teacher's head. I show them what I saw. How do they interpret it? And then we use that data to plan an intervention. So the third phase is he, the teacher, implements an intervention if it's a student-focused issue. And I support them in that. So there's where my professional development, I'm doing a lot of the teacher learner role during that. I come in and model how to do the intervention. I take that teacher's class so they can go watch another teacher at their grade level who's doing this intervention really well, or whatever it is. So we do the intervention. And then the fourth phase is we evaluate it. Did it work? Did it not work? Now that kid is fixed. So do we want to turn our attention to a new kid? Whatever it is, but it's in that collaborative problem solving framework that I get into the teacher's head and begin to establish that relationship where they trust me enough and I have enough of a sense of who they are. Yes, and I see that, Kina, we're looking at the data together. In fact, in our book, in this version of the book, we have, I believe it's chapter 11, I think, which is a chapter 12, which is a chapter for administrators. And it's our kind of our wish list of, if you're going to be the supervisor of a coach, here's what we have learned works the best or not best. And we do have a wish list of, I think it's 13 things that we hope that an administrator would do. 11, it's 11 things. And one of them is, we would like you as the administrator to mandate that it's the only mandate I want you to give. I would like you to mandate that when I, as the coach, come to work with a teacher, that teacher share current student data with me. And that might be attendance data, it might be behavioral data, it might be test scores, it might grades, whatever the teacher has. That's the start of our conversation. And it's really effective. And it works better if the principal says you have to do it. Now, that doesn't make every teacher eager to do it. And, oh, yay, you're here, let's look at my data together. But if it's a mandate, then I don't have to come in and say, could we look at your data? And the teacher says, no. So, I have so many stories and experiences. And so I know the pitfalls and the challenges of this. There's nothing that makes it work smoothly and perfectly all the time with everybody, because there are those reluctant teachers, for sure. For sure.
Jan, that's a good segue to the question. One of the questions in this chat that says, what are your thoughts on administrators telling you who to work with? I have felt uncomfortable starting to coach these colleagues because it can feel like I'm supposed to have the magic wand and fix problems that administrators see. How can you help them navigate that really not great situation?
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons we wrote that chapter in the book, is because part of the power and authority that you do not have is to go in and tell your principal how they should do their job. So we kind of did it for you. You can just say, this is, it's a learning curve. And I'm also I have not yet worked or encountered a principal who has had any reasonable level of training about coaching. They're usually blank slates. They don't know about coaching. They've just been told, you're going to have a coach, you're going to have 3 coaches, you're going to have a part-time coach. And maybe that's it. Kind of like what Mr. Walsh told me, you're going to have a coach. Then they make up in their head, either based on their previous experiences, which could be good or not good, or they just think, what does a coach do? Oh, a coach helps bad teachers get better, or whatever they do. So we have to have bravely conversations with our administrator about models and approaches and best practices and what the research says. And those sometimes go really well. And you do have those eager and open administrators, and you do have administrators that just talk to the hand. I'm doing it my way. You go do this. So then we have to make it work. We have to quit the job and move to another school, or try to make it work within that framework. And it's really challenging, but it's not what you should do. You should have clarity around your role, that your role is to provide professional development to all teachers, knowing that some teachers are more needy than others. I don't like models where coaches are assigned to work equal amount of time with all the teachers. I don't think that's the right way to spend a coach's job, a coach's precious time. But I see the rationale in that you don't just work with your favorite people or the people who make you feel comfortable or the teachers who let you in their classroom or all that, the complexity of that. But the same amount of time for every teacher, I haven't seen that be very effective. But you have to start somewhere. So we have our little tricks of the trade too about building your caseload. Some people talk about it in the research literature. Getting started, or entry is another term used in the research literature.
That's Dave's question. So that's a great, if you can unpack that a little bit. Dave, do you want to ask that of Jan?
Yeah, I think she pretty much covered everything that I was wondering. That's my main thing, is trying to think about the whole balance of coaching individual teachers versus the meetings, and just how to come to a good plan to make those decisions and divvy up your time, and I think you've touched on so many parts. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've been taking notes.
Good. Very good. And I'm happy to follow up. We've got another session for me to come back, but I'm on Twitter too. I'm happy to follow, to have chats on this on Twitter, or any other follow-up specifically. I like to coach coaches. I'll tell you, I thought about this today in preparation for this. I was remembering when I first moved from being a teacher to my new role, working with Jerry Tyndall and now running his coaching training, and trying to explain what I was doing now to my children. My daughter at that time, 6 years old, at the dinner table one night, we're all sitting there having dinner, and she looked up and said, "Mommy, I know what you do. You teach teachers how to teach teachers how to teach." Yeah, I guess I do. I'm training coaches how to work with teachers so that they're good teachers. So I teach teachers how to teach teachers how to teach. So that's kind of it. So we never have enough time. We either have, way too many teachers to work with, or we have a reasonable number of teachers to work with, but only some want to work with us. I mean, there's so much about how to manage and establish your caseload, but if you have some control over how you spend your time, and if you embrace the notion of student focused, we suggest that you start with student need. And so one of the things that you could do if you're assigned to a school, which some coaches are, would be to take a look at school-wide student data, and see if there's areas that seem to obviously need some focus. The other, alongside that, that's not it alone. So there's really three sort of data sources that we recommend using to structure your role or how you use your time. Student performance data on a big picture for the school or a grade level or whatever it is what you want to use. Ask the teachers a questionnaire. What is it that you feel strong about, weak about, and you can frame that around early reading or foundational skills. Or I saw somebody was a science coach. What are the science concepts you feel like you want some help with, or the new curriculum, or whatever it is? Do a questionnaire of the teachers, and then ask the administrator to weigh in. What are as the leader of this school, or a department, if you're coaching in a department head, I mean, whoever the leader is, what are your key outcome goals for this year? What will make you happy at the end of the year? What do you want to see change or improve? So between those three areas, it's, if we can get data from those three sources or a couple of those sources, it makes a big difference. Then I'm not just wandering the hallways, knocking on doors, trying to drum up business. And it can help me say to, say, a fifth grade teacher who's desperate to work with me, I can say, I will find time to work with you. However, as you are aware, we've set a priority for my time in foundational skills with KN1, whatever it is. So it helps me think about my work and manage my time. And because at the end of the year, I want to feel successful too. I want to think, what did I do? What did I accomplish? What's different here? And the more I can focus my work around some strategic goals, I have found that to be very helpful.
We have one question left in the chat. Jeannie, it's yours. You want to deliver that?
Yeah, Jan, oftentimes, we work with a lot of teachers, particularly in upper grades, well, all grades probably, that are reluctant, like, I don't need a coach, right?
Mhm.
Coaching, it doesn't belong in schools. So like
Right.
you mentioned research a lot, right? So what are
Yeah.
some of those like powerful articles or powerful research that when you're in those dialogues, you can say, this is what the effect is on student learning when you have a coach?
Yeah, there's not much, Jeannie. Sorry about that. There is the go-to study that I use a lot is a fairly recent one, Kraft et al., Kraft with a K, who with his colleagues did a meta-analysis of the relatively few studies that are out there about coaching and found that coaching is effective, but it's very global. It's not very specific, but it does show under what circumstances and what kind of coaching does work best. So Kraft et al., see if I can put my
I
finger
think
on
I've
it.
recently posted that, Jan.
Okay,
I think
it's
they might be able to find
a
it on the
real
site.
go-to in part
Yeah.
because it is a meta-analysis, but Kraft, Blazer, Hogan, 2018, The Effect of Teacher Coaching on Instruction and Achievement, a meta-analysis of causal evidence, review of ed research. So, and there are others, but one of the reasons there's such a dearth of this research is it's really, really hard to study coaching. My research on coaching has mostly been descriptive about the model. We've done it this way as opposed to this way, and this is why we do it this way. But if we really care, well, we can measure teacher outcomes, but that's not what people really care about. Did this teacher get better on some defined scale? You can measure that, but did the kids get any better? Maybe, maybe not. And if you are measuring the kids and they don't get better, how can you attribute that to the quality of the coaching? Maybe it was a superb coach working with a teacher who just said, fine, I'll do all that wonderful stuff you're telling me to do. And then you close the door and they don't do it. So the coaching might have been superb, but the teacher was the intermediary factor. It's just super hard to study. So we don't have a whole lot of proof. So I go to student-focused data and rationale to look at the vast amount of research, especially those of us who work in reading. We're very lucky, this growing body of solid evidence that say when students receive high quality early, especially intervention and instruction, they do markedly, measurably better. And then I would, one of the things I would say to a reluctant teacher is that, and it's really, really hard to do. And I also say to teachers, without judgment, I simply share the research, the growing body of evidence and statements that researchers including Louisa Moats has been saying it for a long time. Sharon Vaughn and Jack Fletcher recently said it, many others. 95% of kids can be taught to read at a reasonably effective level. So I use that with teachers, especially if I don't care if I piss them off or not, and just say, if your students are at, if 95% of your students are grade level, I would love to work in your classroom because I want to see what you're doing. If you're not at 95%, I'd be willing to roll up my sleeves and see if there's a way that we can get those kids there, because the research is clear they can. So I've used all those tricks. I've used persuasion. And at the bottom, the end of the day, Jeannie, is that there's some teachers, you have no power and authority. If they won't work with you, they won't work with you. And we have a whole chapter in the book about how to work with teachers at different levels of reticence and openness. And because when I was consulting in coaching, I still am to this day to a certain extent, but the number one call from an administrator or a district leader is, please come in. We're doing coaching, and we've got a whole lot of reluctant teachers who don't want to work with the coach. That's the number one thing. So we talk about teachers not being reluctant or not reluctant, but being open and open to work with the teacher and willing to make some change. Open to working with the coach and willing to make some change. That's a category of teachers. There are other teachers who are open to work with the coach, but they won't change. Those are your time suckers. Those are the people who, oh, I love having you in my classroom. Oh, this is wonderful. Please come in anytime you want to. And they never change. And then we've got those teachers who are not willing to work with the coach and have no intention of changing. And we've got strategies for all three of those, but there's nothing that you can force them to do. It's persuasion. It's working with their colleague next door and having great success and asking that colleague to advertise the success. It's sharing student performance data that, oh, look, this teacher that's been working with Jan, all her kids are 98% of her kids are succeeding. Whatever, there's persuasion that we can do. But I have yet, in 30 some years of doing this, found the magic words or phrase or study to show a teacher that was, oh, in that case, I'd love to work with you. Haven't found it yet.
We are at 8 o'clock right now. Perfect ending point. As we think about moving forward into our next session, we'll be here August 15th again. And I just want to say thank you so much to Jan. And we will come back and just frame up walk out a little bit more specificity around the pieces that Jan and Daryl have put in the book. Any last words from you, Jan?
I just put my Twitter in there if people want to connect that way. And I know we can't get a lot done on Twitter, but we can connect on Twitter.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you all for being here, and thank you for the thank yous. Coaching is really hard. That's what I want to say. Coaching is really hard, but it's amazingly rewarding. I feel very blessed that I've had this opportunity to do as much coaching. I wouldn't. It's hard, but worth it. And there are some good strategies and ideas. You do not have to go out there and just flounder like I did. There are good guides. I like to think we've put together one of the best, but you don't have to do this all on your own.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.